Hello, everyone. This is Larry Lewis again on the Mentors Lounge. It brings me great pleasure to come on here again this day. And the person I have on my guest list is someone that is so special. I met this person about 7 years plus ago, and we've formed a wonderful relationship together. He was my co-supervisor during my PhD at Rhodes University in South Africa. And he has a very interesting academic career journey. And the reason why I brought him here today is to help people in the academic sphere to know how to navigate the different storms, different career challenges that every academic who aspires to get to the top professorial level would like to know how to navigate. And so without taking much of our time, I would like to introduce, I call him Kirstin, but he's actually a professor. He's Professor Kirstin Krauss. Welcome, Kirstin, to the Mentors Lounge this day.
Thank you so much, Landry. Really appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
Oh, yeah. So now, someone will be wondering, who is Kirstin Krauss? By the way, Kirstin is a South African, and he is a phenomenal person. Very deep thinker indeed, very deep thinker. One thing I learned from him during my PhD was how to do critical thinking, all right? Because he's a critical theorist. So Kirstin, please, can we meet you? Let our viewers meet you today. Who is Kirstin Krauss?
So yeah, there's two versions of this. It's the official and then it's the real version. So I'll start with the official version. I'm Kirstin Krauss. In August I resigned from UNISA as a full professor, and I'm now currently in research consulting on a full-time basis. But my career actually started around 2000, my academic career, and I remember distinctly speaking to another mentor of mine. And in fact, yes, this could be a very interesting principle. Throughout my career, I was seeking mentors, people that are better than me, with wisdom and that can handle me, handle my personality. But I distinctly remember a discussion with a very early mentor of mine, and the guy said, Professor Sam Lober said, you know what, if you go into academia, you really have a good lucrative career. Because at that stage I was thinking, should I go in as a practitioner or should I go into academia? And he basically persuaded me, and I thought to myself, if I want to be an academic, let me do it as good as possible. So I've sought opportunities all the time. Okay, so maybe also something about myself. I'm somebody who's a high risk taker. I take risks easily, and part of that is that I moved a lot, in terms of moving jobs. And each time that move in a new job, gave me a new opportunity, in some cases, a promotion. And about 2 or 3 times it happened that I was, given a position without the necessary degree, on the condition that I finished the degree. And so as a result, I've worked in South Africa at 5 different universities. And if you consider the fact that 2 of those went through mergers, I actually worked at 7 different universities, because 2 of them were actually 4 before. And so I was really intrigued with this whole idea of research, and as a result I really sought people that could help me. And I remember also distinctly right in the beginning, Sam Lober resigned, and I thought, I need a good supervisor that can handle me. I don't want to take anyone, because I'm really interested in doing this thing right. There was also a very distinct point, because I'm in the information technology or information systems discipline, but I thought to myself, if I can master and understand people around the technology, I'll probably be more, sustainable in the work I do. And I said, well, let me do that sort of thing. So I found a very good mentor, Rembrandt Klopper. He's now over 70 at the moment. I moved with him to University of KwaZulu-Natal. I did my master's degree, finished it there with summa cum laude, which means that I got more than 80% for the degree. And when I was done, it's like I spoke to my head of department. I said, I can't do research here. There's no support. Let me move to the next thing. And I went over to University of Pretoria, and then I did my PhD. And again, at my PhD, I was really fortunate to have good training at that point. And there was one guy who introduced us to different methodologies and different philosophies. And he basically said, and it's also part of my reading, he said the most difficult methodology is ethnography. And he said the most difficult philosophy is critical theory. And I said, well, let me combine the two, because if I can master those, I can master everything. So after Pretoria, I went to Rhodes University, where I met Lanre. When to the point when I finished my PhD, I discovered, there's no research support, and I started pursuing research capacity building workshops. And Lewis, you were one of the first ones.
Yes.
At that stage, and it was even before I delivered my first PhD. And at that stage, I met another mentor called Ojelanki Ngwenyama. And there was a distinct moment when he couldn't make the workshops that I organized, and I told him, I said, I've got all these people. What am I going to do? He said, you do it. And I was thrown into the deep end, and and from there it just escalated, to the point where I now do this full time.
Yep.
So that's my official. If I say the real one, I would say I'm a father of 3 beautiful daughters.
Oh yeah.
I'm happily married for 25 years now.
Awesome.
And I can tell you, if I retire, I'll still be a father and hopefully a grandfather. So that's my real identity.
Awesome. Wonderful. As you can see, Kirstin is being modest with his profile, right? As you can know, he has said he's a professor. But Kirstin has many parts that I really appreciate. And those parts are things that I want him to kind of x-ray a bit for people who would like to have that as kind of the feathers added to their cap, apart from being a professor or wherever in the academic end. Now, I know Kirstin is an editor of several journals. He has been a conference chair. He was one, I don't know whether he's still doing one, but I know he has been conference chair for several conferences. He's a foremost researcher in ICT for development. Kirstin is a critical realist. So one thing I want to ask you is this. You moved from master's to PhD, now to professorial. But how did you build capacity to become a journal editor? How did you build this? Because every person in academia will always wonder that, is it all about the teaching and research? How do you now start building those bridges that will make you to become somebody that has a voice in academia? Can you speak to that for those who are listening to this?
Yeah. Well, I could say the most important thing is, I would say, was that during the early processes of my PhD journey, I was trying to find out where the specialists in the field are coming together and talking about, the discipline. And I discovered that the Special Interest Group on Global Development is a very strong community with really senior researchers, including editors. They come together about 3 times a year at some of the top information systems conferences. So very early, I started joining those communities. And so what I did is, I found this to be a very useful strategy, is to publish as much as possible from my PhD. simply because I don't want my arguments to get out there the first time when an examiner sees it. I want the community to have seen the arguments at the conferences and at the journals. So in 2009, there were two distinct conferences that I attended. The one was Special Interest Group on Global Development. It was in the US. And there was another one, the IDEA Conference, and it was in the Kruger National Park. And what was interesting is for both of those conferences, it was actually my first conference presentation. For both of those conferences, I actually met the editors. I met really senior, people in the field. And for example, Ron Weber at the IDEA conference, he spoke to rhetoric, rigor, and relevance as important principles for the work we need to do. And what was interesting is exactly 9 years later, in 2018, I was the proceedings chair of that exact same conference. Because continuously every year when opportunities are sent out for me to review papers, I involved myself there. I attended the conference as much as possible. So when an opportunity for hosting the conference came about, I just took it on, although it was the first time, and sometimes a bit scary because I had to learn on the go. And the same with the special interest group. I met Sazja Qureshi. She's the editor-in-chief of IT4D, which is one of the top ICT for development journals. And we started building a relationship. And it wasn't long that, they invited me to become special issue chair for, special issue editor for the journal. And currently I, every now and again, handle a paper or two from that journal. And the same with Robert Davison. I met him at the IFAB conference and some other conference in Cape Town. And he approached me, and the next thing is I became a senior editor for that journal. And it really gave me insight, not only from where, to push research into the discourse, but also how it looks from the other side. How the review process looked like, how the process of selecting editors looked like, and it really gave me an opportunity to network. People got to know me. And so like last year, at the IFAB group, they were looking for somebody who can speak to critical theory in ICT4D, and obviously my name popped up.
Right.
And they invited me and I could sit on a panel.
So the secret is put yourself out there.
Correct.
Put yourself out there. Wonderful. Now, one thing I observe is like you said earlier, navigating and changing jobs from one point to the other has helped you to move up faster. What will you recommend for an early career lecturer or someone in the academia who wants to go through that path? What are the things that are important that the person must have before pitching to move to like, for example, I've seen a situation where someone would jump from a lecturer to become an associate prof. I've seen a situation where somebody jumps from a senior lecturer and become a professor without going through the normal route of lecturer, senior lecturer, associate prof, right? What are the things that you think are important ingredients that must be in place before a person takes that kind of big shot? Because you've done it several times.
Yeah, I've looked at many academics, it's not just in South Africa, but worldwide, and there's a general tendency that they stay in one place. And there's value in that, because you really have opportunity to build a discipline within the area. And within with the brand, because each university is also a brand. But there's a couple of other things that I would say is important. The one is that you need to find a career path that fits your personality. For me, I'm somebody, I know I can go 3 years, develop an idea, master a particular environment, and then improve year 4 and 5. But then after that, it's like I need something new to inspire me, to keep me going, because I've always told my students and my family, and I'm worried that I get stuck in a rut, if you want. And so firstly, I would say find something that really fits your personality. And and when I say that, it's not just a career path, it's also the sort of research you do. I was really lucky to find that very unique mix. And the fact that I jumped around really gave me insight into how research capacity can be built in different universities. And then the other thing is, what I would say is, at some point in life, you'll find that self-discipline can fail you. But it's at that point that passion keeps you going.
That's
And
interesting.
It's really interesting, and you need to. That's why I say you need to find something that fits your personality. What I see with many people is students they want to please their supervisor, and sometimes your supervisor can give you a topic or a direction or a way of thinking, but it could be that it's because it's to their interest. You need to find your interest and then pursue that. Okay. Two other things that I would also say is, go there where you can connect in a good university or connect with a good supervisor. Now, if I say a good supervisor, it means somebody that has published well, somebody that's recognized, somebody that already built the social capital over some time. So either one of those two will really give you the environment to grow. Now, I worked in both sorts of environments, universities that I would consider not research intensive, but I was lucky to have a good mentor in that university. I also worked in the other environment where there was a real good research intensive university, but not necessarily a supervisor that could mentor me. And therefore, in addition to my supervisor as a mentor, I also sought mentorship from outside. And if I found someone, I would connect to that person and get to know how that person mastered the discourse and became an expert. Obviously, there's more, but this is what I'm thinking of right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, that's deep. I mean, you mentioned some deep nuggets there, which I would like to re-echo for people who did not pick that. Number one is find a career path and research niche that fits your personality. That one is very key. Self-discipline can fail you, but passion keeps you going. So it's about identifying your passion. Then you need to find your own interests, what actually interests you, what actually motivates you, and go all out for it. Then in picking mentors, one thing that you need to have in mind is to have someone that has the right social capital within the discourse that you want to play in. That's very key. So I just said I should, because I was noting them down for people, because sometimes when something is said, they don't pick it for the first time. So I said I should re-echo that.
If I can add something to that, I really believe that you need to also choose a topic or a research focus that can make the world a better place. Not just a topic that, will give you a piece of paper. I really believe, and you spoke about this right in the beginning, but the fact that you get a PhD implies social capital, which implies that you are a leader in society. And therefore you have a responsibility to demonstrate accountability and to demonstrate responsibility by doing something that really makes the world a better place.
Awesome. That is very key. And that has always been my driving force in most of the things that I do. Because especially within the academia, most people from Global South, African, will rather publish papers just for the sake of maybe promotion. But I'm always like, why can't you push out something that is either addressing a particular challenge within the social sphere or within an industry and do research in that area. That is how your academic output can actually make a difference in the world. Right. So it's not about publishing, it's not about pushing out papers, but more about what is the impact of that publication? What is the impact of that research? Does it make things better? Does it make the discourse better? Does it make, for example, teaching and learning? How can you improve it? What research can you conduct and push out? And so that has always been my driving force also.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
You know, I've seen so many researchers in the African context, researchers and students where they go in with a very interesting topic or a theory, but in the process of doing this research, they encounter contexts, communities or environments that the international community hasn't seen yet. There's no literature on that. Maybe some information, but not enough information. And what I see is many African or emerging researchers, they have a natural ability to adapt their research approaches to the context. For example, if you read about how to do interviews and you get the Western perspective, there's a particular protocol and approach. But you intuitively know that when you go to a traditional community, for example, there are ways, there's African ways of doing this. And you intuitively do this. But now what I see the researchers do is they bracket that experience out of the writing.
Yeah.
I had a very interesting conversation in 2018 with a dean of a very prominent university in the US. And I was simply telling this lady some of the experiences that I had and trying to adapt my research approaches for the context. And she listened to me and she said, you know what, we experience the same thing in the US. Can you come and tell your story to us? And it's like we underestimate the real contextual contributions that we can make as scientists from the South.
Yeah.
The international community really needs to hear this, but we think it's not valuable.
That is very key. And that brings me to the next question that I want to ask you. One thing that I've observed with African researchers or people in academia in the especially global South is this: the boldness or the courage to tell the story the way it is. For example, during my PhD, the research was on how to use personally owned ICTs, right? Developing a framework to use personally owned ICTs, right, for teaching and learning in resource-constrained environment. Now, if you tell someone in the global North that broadband is not available, or you don't have laptop or systems in the lecture room, or you don't have power projectors in public institutions, it does not make sense because that is the experience in the global North. But in global South, most countries, students, lecturers create this experience themselves. They use the laptops, they use their mobile phones, they use mobile data, and they use their phones as hotspots. Whereas in global North, the hotspot is within the building. But in global South, the hotspot is your mobile phone. How do you maximize all those things and still have the kind of experience that is there? So my question to you is, from your journey, right, you must have encountered some context, some discourse, some experience that you wonder, how am I going to present this as a research output, for example, in a conference or in a journal? Can you share one or two of those experiences and how you're able to present it in the global space, especially in those international conferences?
Yeah, so traditionally, a lot of the social science research is based on the assumption that they should mimic the natural sciences, which means that what is valued is this sort of analytical rationality. And when you go into a social environment or any sort of environment, let's say a bank, you start off with a theoretical framework, and you use that as a lens to move into this new environment. So, some people would call that deductive reasoning. In other words, you start off with a conceptual lens, and you decide what I'm going to focus on and what I'm not going to focus on. However, the reality is when you encounter new and interesting contexts, it can border on being unethical if you take some sort of lens, or it could be a Western theory or whatever, and you move with that into the environment, because you then choose to not look at some of the contextual uniqueness of the environment. And therefore, I would say that for the African context and the emerging context, and especially where there's new innovation, is that one should use some form of inductive or abductive reasoning, which means that that everything starts with data. There's a data-driven reasoning. In practice, it's going to mean that as a researcher, you need to go into the context, the environment, and spend time there until the phenomena and the problem emerges to you. And sometimes it requires from you to spend time. What I found personally to really work well is to describe that phenomena by mastering narrative writing, telling the story. There's a very interesting book by Ben Fleesburg that says making social science matter again, something like that. And there he says, he gives a couple of principles, and including in that list, he says, paying attention to the small things. Sometimes things cannot be generalized to other situations. So I found that to be a very useful approach, where there's a very interesting and in-depth description of the context. But over on top of that, if you go and read the literature about what sort of contributions we can make, there's a lot that you can read. You get papers that say, for example, you have descriptive contributions, explanatory contributions, predictive contributions. Others would say, you can make methodological contributions, theoretical contributions, and practical contributions. I think as researchers from emerging environments, we need to think what sort of methodological contributions and what sort of theoretical contributions we can bring to the table based on the data-driven work we've done. For example, a practical example would be, if I read up about how to do in-depth interviews, I will get a lot of reading generated from the North. But if I take those principles and I take the philosophy, the underpinning philosophy to guide me, and I go and I try and do that, I'll find that I need to adapt that. I can come back to the community and say, this is how I think, and suggest, based on the science that I've done, how I should do interviews differently. And the same goes with whatever methodological choice you make. This is how you do case study in different environments. This is how you do ethnography in different environments. This is how you do design science. Now, design science is an interesting one because it's all about the artifact. Yeah. But what I sometimes miss there is how to make this fit in the context. And you will know yourself, design ethnography allows you to look at both the practical or the artifact part and the social side.
Yes.
And that's the way we need to think, I would say.
Awesome. That's really, really, really profound. So many nudges being dropped on this interview. Very interesting. Now, one question I want to ask again is this. When you became a professor, how did you feel? Was it like, there's still more?
I'm going to be honest, and people would say one of my biggest problems.
When they say professorial chair, the person has got to the top. You feel like it's different.
Yeah. To be honest, when I remember distinctly that moment when I did my inauguration. Now, in South Africa, you have to do an inauguration.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I prepared a talk of about a half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that, on transformation and the type of leadership we need in the South African context.
Mm.
And I remember that feeling when I closed the book and I thought to myself, you know what? This is it. I need a new challenge. And now with me resigning from
UNISA.
UNISA, I actually lost my professor title. But funny enough, it doesn't bother me. Because
Mm.
you can take away my piece of paper, you can take away everything, you can remove my LinkedIn account. What I've learned is to discipline my thinking. Okay,
Mm.
you know, the PhD in the entire process in such a way redefined me that, you know, it allowed me, in a way, I would say I'm liberated in many ways because I can take on challenges without feeling that I don't have a way of engaging with these challenges.
Yeah.
You know, especially around your abilities to see things, you know, your ways of deepening understanding, getting to the point where you know that you don't know. Many people
Yeah.
don't know that they don't know.
They don't know.
It's so liberating to know that I don't know
Yeah.
because it gives you the sense of, you know, I know my vulnerabilities, you know, and I actually embrace my vulnerabilities because it keeps me in touch.
Mm. 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 That's one thing that we can tell anyone that I took away from doing a PhD research.
Mm.
I try to tell everybody that asked me the question, how do you feel when you have a PhD? I said that one thing that PhD has done for me is that it tells you that there is nothing you cannot do
Yeah.
if you decide to do it. Because PhD will stretch you, it will
Mm.
expand your thinking faculty, it will expand your capacity. You
Mm.
will go through the lows, you go through the highs. And so you will have gone through almost every manner of um, personal, emotional, different things. And so
Mm.
no matter the challenge that comes your way, you have this mind that says that, all right, this is how far I can go, or this is how far
Mm.
you want to stop, you know, and it gives you that clarity, that perspective to be able to strengthen. So now, going forward, right, you're now in consulting. That's a good transition. How has it been moving to consulting?
It's been extremely successful, and you know, I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, and I would say that the more I think about theory and philosophy, the more I discover that I'm a practitioner. It meaning that I don't believe that you can theorize out in the sky or do philosophy out in the sky and there's no practical application of this. Um, you know, I kind of struggled a lot with this idea of, you know, publishing stuff and you get maybe 15 citations over a period of 2 years.
Hmm.
And you know, you actually poured out your heart into this paper to really write something down, tell the story, show your vulnerability, you know,
Hmm.
provide guidelines. And the only people that read this are other researchers also working in environment. They're not necessarily practitioners. They're not necessarily, you know, embedded in the communities where development is needed. You know, I also struggled, you know, when I go to these conferences and we actually talk then about this principle and this whole idea of what development means. But
Hmm.
the people in the room are people, middle class academics, but the people who needs development are not there. I don't hear their voices.
Hmm.
And if I hear their voices, it's like a secondary voice that comes through a paper or a presentation of somebody who went there.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of value in that because as scientists and academics, we have a responsibility to do the explanation requirements. But somebody
Hmm.
has to get their hands dirty. And I found it a lot very stimulating to be able to engage with literally hundreds of PhD students in Southern Africa to guide them in a practical way in terms of the process of making sure that your PhD is successful. but at the same time engendering the principles of that something like a PhD or something like a supervision relationships automatically implies social capital. It automatically implies leadership, accountability, and responsibility. And so I feel that the fact that I can do that gives me more reach, presenting those workshops. So at this stage, it's basically what I do on a full-time basis. At this stage, there's about 6 universities in South Africa, different contexts, where I'm involved in building PhD programs, and it's so stimulating. I don't have to do all the admin around it. I've managed to, although the education environment is a good thing, it helped me, but there's also a lot of social control there. And I given my personality, I'm not that guy that you put in a box. Sorry. I'm gonna jump out, even if it means that I need to invest some of my own money. So that's where I am. Yeah.
Oh yeah, awesome. Now, if I don't ask this question, it would be as if Kirstin has had a smooth sail, right? Can you share an experience that disrupted your process, that disrupted your path, your life? And you were like, how am I going to get out of this? But you came out.
Yeah, I came out.
How were you able to get out? And this is because on the Mentors Lounge, the focus of the Mentors Lounge is to democratize success. That is to say, success is possible. If you know the path, someone who has gone through it before can always tell you that you go this path. So on this journey, can you share an experience that disrupted you? I mean, it was a big blow, but you still came out of it.
Yeah. Before I can answer that, I must say, and in fact, just this morning, I said to a colleague of mine, I said a master's degree or a PhD is a family effort. And I've been so privileged, I remember my wife, when I walked over the stage, she was the one crying, because we as a family put so much effort in, not just, emotional, but it's financial effort. I had to, give up a job, sell a few things, sell a car, move to a new place, to get in a space where I can actually do this. It's like taking a few steps back in order to move in a different direction. But I can remember one particular case, and it's more on the PhD part, where I really grappled with how to do this methodology that I've chosen. And my supervisor, she wasn't an expert in critical ethnography, let alone critical theory. And on the one side, this really gave me insight into what's the purpose of the supervisor. A supervisor is not the topic expert. A supervisor is an expert in gatekeeping. And she was very good with it. So I really grappled, and I remember one distinct moment. I was lying on my bed, and it was almost like a sense of panic. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. I know nobody that can do what I do, or that is doing what I do. And you have to pick yourself up, and you have to go back to the drawing board and find ways. Now, my supervisor was very lucky, very good, and I was lucky that she said, and we actually had a disagreement. She said I was doing this. I said, no, I'm doing that. And she said, okay, persuade me by writing 10 pages. And she specifically said 10 pages. And I wrote a 10-page argument to persuade her of my position as a critical theorist. She came back to me and she said, I disagree with you. And I thought to myself, I can now back off and say, okay, let me do what you say, or I'm going to fight this. Because the fight is about the argument, it's not the person. I took the 10 pages, I shaped it, and I submitted it for a conference in Barcelona in 2012. Wow. And it was unique in the sense that I wanted to portray this principle of reflexive writing. And I didn't see much of that, because academics in general, or many of them at least, they try and keep the objective distance even in the way they write. And I remember distinctly, I was doing this presentation, and one of my mentors were there, and the chair said, Jan, let's move on to the next presentation. And he said, no, stop, I need to say this. This is the first time I see this. In fact, it was Ujalanki Ngwenyama.
Wow.
I thought, okay, I got it. And my HOD at that stage was also there. She went back to my supervisor and said, you know what, this guy got good feedback at the conference.
Wow.
And so I was taking my argument to the community because my supervisor couldn't see, and I had to find ways to persuade my supervisor because it's about an argument.
Yeah.
And eventually my supervisor and Ujalanki started speaking to each other, and eventually my supervisor understood what I was doing.
Wow.
And that was like a moment where I felt, you know, I've managed to develop an ability to persuade one of the toughest critics.
Wow.
So yeah, that's I would say one of the.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Wow. You had to get, as it were, international validation to convince the local critic of your position. And that's huge. I mean, it takes great courage to do that.
And
I mean, I'm sure you will have been scared even when you were making that presentation at the conference, seeing all the quote unquote giants in the field.
Yeah, I can tell you I was sweating, and because it was early in my career at that stage.
Man, yeah. That's a wonderful experience you shared there. I mean, yeah. I've gained something from that place. And lastly, because I've taken your time this morning, lastly, what is one word you can, or an advice that you can give an academic person from the African context? Yeah. How do you build relevance in the global stage?
How do I build relevance? You know, I've made a few notes,
especially from an African context, because there is this mindset of like a limiting belief, right? Self-limiting belief that hinders someone from the global south to jump out and get to the global stage. What can you tell that person? How can you navigate? What that person needs to do from your experience?
Yeah. Okay, so this is not like you have to do this. This is a reflection on what one can do. Okay, because nothing is ever a rule. You need to challenge everything that anyone tells you, including what I tell you. But what I found, you know, people from African communities, and, you know, I'm even speaking to myself, the way I grew up is you are taught, and many of us are taught like that, is it's disrespectful to challenge your elders in your communities. So like my father would, you know, if I would not challenge him, if I was right, he was wrong, I would not challenge him because it was disrespectful.
It's a culture.
It's a culture thing. And, you know, and where I see this and why I see this manifest is because traditional communities are in many ways socially more developed than Western communities, in the sense that they know how to nurture relationships outside of the direct family. They know how to nurture relationships in the broader community, which is a very unique thing, which I don't see as much in Western communities, and it's not valued as much in Western communities. And you know, even for me, in that sense, I challenge the meaning of the word development, because it's development of what? You know, is it what sort of development? Because do you want to underdevelop your social skills in order to develop your financial skills? I don't know. But the thing that I've observed is that many of our students come from those backgrounds, and they think they must treat their supervisor or their lecturer as an elder by keeping quiet to show respect. Although they feel they can challenge the argument, they feel they must keep quiet because it's inappropriate or it's disrespectful or whatever. The reality for us is that a lot of the structures that we have in education is imported from the West. So like in South Africa, the whole education structure is imported from the UK. So it is a Western bubble within the African context, if you will. So what I found really helps my student in liberate them to start participating in the debate is to say, I'm not your elder. I want to invite you to disagree with me, and I want you to disagree with me because it's about the argument. And in this context, it's respectful to participate and be critical. And if that basis of understanding is settled, I found many Africans, they just engage because they realize that they are almost like they feel they're now allowed to snap out of their traditional way of doing things and be more outspoken, be more critical.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Awesome.
And that's one perception. It's not the only one. It's one perception.
Oh, yeah.
But keep it in mind,
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirstin. I've taken your time this morning, and I really enjoyed this session. I mean, this is something I will watch again myself, because you have shared deep stuff in this about 48 minutes talking with you this morning. Guys, ladies, gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming on the Mentors Lounge again. And it is Professor Kirstin Krauss. Even though he has dropped his professorship, I will say he's a professor. Once you're a professor, you're a professor, all right? And that is it for the Mentors Lounge interview today. Thank you very much, everyone. It's bye from me, from Larry.